Welcome to GovCon Unscripted, where we dive into the unfiltered stories and strategies from all around the world of government contracting. Join host Chelsea Roberts as she explores how to navigate, thrive, and win in this complex but lucrative industry.
Welcome to GovCon Unscripted. This is your host, Chelsea Roberts. Today's episode is a part of a series that we're calling Success After Service. We're featuring brilliant minds with wisdom to share from throughout the federal ecosystem, folks that served in the military and have transitioned out and found some success after their time, either in federal or military service. I hope that you enjoy this episode and the series, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to GovCon Unscripted. I'm your host, Chelsea Roberts, CEO of Collaborative Compositions. Today, I've got with us Dan Ward, co-founder of the SparkLit Group. Dan, who are you and what do you do?
Hey, Chelsea, thanks so much for the opportunity to be on your show. My name's Dan Ward, and I am the co-founder of a small innovation consultancy. We work with groups to help them deliver creative solutions to hard problems and help them work together more effectively.
Wow, that's quite the mouthful there. How do you go about doing that with the SparkLit Group?
Yeah, we work primarily with mission-driven organizations, everything from nonprofits in the healthcare space to government and academia. We do training on innovation tools and techniques. We lead workshops, and we introduce kind of tools and methods and principles and practices, like I said, to help teams work together more effectively, to navigate culture, to communicate, to collaborate, and lots of other words that begin with C.
I love that. I love that. Obviously, collaboration is a big part of my business and what we do at Collaborative Compositions. That's included in the name. But how did you come to be in this industry?
So I was in the Air Force for 20 years as an active duty engineer, military technology guy. My specialty was rapid innovation. So I loved building and leading small teams with short schedules and tight budgets to, as quickly as we can, design, develop, and deliver new military tech. I wrote a couple of books along the way, spent 8 years at the MITRE Corporation, and then I enjoyed that work so much that I decided to quit. In 2024, my current business partner and I worked together to deliver 11 innovation workshops just as a side hustle. It wasn't the day job for either of us. But as we got to about number 8 or 9 or 10, we're like, oh my gosh, this is the most fun thing we do on any given day. People seem to like it. They seem to benefit from it. We're good at it. We're good at it together. And we began exploring the possibility of what if that was our main day job? And in May of 2025, we both put in our 2 weeks notice and headed off into the wild blue yonder to go try this new entrepreneurial thing of the SparkLit Group.
Wow. Wow. That's quite the shift from going from the largest bureaucracy in the world, arguably, with the government, with the Air Force, into a somewhat smaller, but still very large bureaucracy of MITRE. What was that transition like?
Yeah, it was fascinating and just interesting and fun. So in between leaving the Air Force and coming to MITRE, I did spend about 2 years as an Army of One independent consultant speaker. I had a couple of my first 2 books had just come out. And I enjoyed that work, but I missed being part of the longer term goals and objectives of a team. And so when somebody from MITRE reached out and says, hey, we have this opening, we have this thing, and Dan, what we would like you to do is teach MITRE how to do the things that you write about in your book and help MITRE teach the Air Force and our other government sponsors how to do the things you write about in your books. I was like, that sounds great to me. So that was a nice transition into that larger structured entity that provided the overhead and the contracts and things like that. So MITRE in a certain way felt like coming back home again because it was all the things I liked best about being in uniform without a lot of the things that I didn't like as much about being in uniform. And yeah, we had a lovely 8 years and got to do a lot of interesting things.
I would love to dive into what it is that you liked best about being in uniform and areas that you didn't. I think from my understanding, you were in the prime heat of the time, which what a lot of people call today innovation theater was really getting ramped up and spinning, and all the innovation organizations were becoming established and everybody was like red hot on this. We can innovate. We're going to do this fast. And ultimately, for me at least, from what I've seen, it's led into a multitude of organizations without any kind of common direction, and there's very little demonstrable outcomes from those organizations. So I want to hear all of your story about that.
Excellent. Yeah, there's some really interesting patterns that show up anytime any organization of any size decides to get serious about innovation. There's some very specific things that tend to happen. The pattern that I've seen play out in the Air Force and the DoD and in NASA and other places goes something like this. A small group of people genuinely and correctly figure out how to do the thing better. And they're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is better. We're getting better results. We're delivering meaningful capabilities that are changing the game. And the larger organization looks at that oftentimes and says, hey, y'all are doing it wrong. How come you're not following the process, following the checklist? And then if they're able to survive that first pass, the organization shifts and says, oh, no, you actually did figure out a better way to do it. Everybody else will do exactly what they're doing. Which on the one hand, yay, that is a type of success. On the other hand, the way something tends to get lost in translation a lot of times, and the translation, everybody go do exactly the way they did it, tends to adopt the superficial versions of the work and not the deeper magic. And the example I use a lot is NASA's Faster, Better, Cheaper missions in the 90s. A short version of it is they had the 7-year time frame with best in class, never been done before, really hard space science that was delivered ahead of schedule, under budget, did more than it was designed to do. They had a 90% success rate for the first 10 missions. And at that point, the skeptics within NASA said, oh, no, faster, better, cheaper actually does work. We can make simultaneous improvements in all three. We don't have to pick two. We can pick all three. And then they said, let's go do that everywhere. And what ended up happening is they adopted faster, better, cheaper as a slogan, not as a deep engineering practice. They used the language, but not the mindset. And then in 1999, 4 out of 5 faster, better, cheaper missions failed. So you went from a 90% success rate to a 20% success rate. That's not a flaw in the method. That means something changed in the application. And when they went back and did the math, they did the investigations. Well, what went wrong in 99? Precisely that. People were using the language, but not the method, and they hadn't actually adopted the practices that led to that success. So that superficial version of it ended up killing it. But it is interesting to me that when we ask the question, should we build an innovation unit, or whatever you call it, we're going to create a special team and they're going to be the innovators. I have very mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, yes, let's build small teams with short schedules and tight budgets to quickly go off and do the innovative thing. That's my favorite thing to do. At the same time, as soon as we say these are the innovators and the other ones are not the innovators, we're letting everybody else off the hook. We're saying this group has the secret sauce and there's a risk of them becoming the high priesthood of innovation. And if you want to do innovation, you have to do it their way and you have to go through them and they own it. And that tends to undermine our intent. That doesn't get us where we're trying to go. So that's something we did actually at MITRE. I was part of a team that developed and led something called the Innovation Toolkit team. And we started off with just 5 people with no budget, no official authority. Nobody told us to go do this. We just thought it would be fun. Fast forward, by the time I left, we had over 100 people who had been trained and certified as ITK facilitators, as Innovation Toolkit facilitators. From early days, we set out very explicitly and deliberately, our mission was to democratize innovation. We did not want to autocratize innovation.
Sure.
So we said, how can we make sure everybody who wants it has access to the tools, the training, and the teammates that you need to do this thing that we call innovation? We didn't want to set ourselves up as the gatekeepers and the controllers and the owners of innovation. So democratize innovation versus autocratize innovation sends you down 2 very different paths.
Sure. And in my experience, when you set an organization up for individualized capabilities or a sort of individualized mission of innovation, it not only puts them into a place where egos can very quickly take over, but it also puts them into a position of being a thorn in the side of the rest of the organization. I've seen a lot of folks that are perturbed by their innovation groups, like the Workses, like all of the entities that stand alone and stand aside from the greater organization as a whole, tend to leave a poor taste in the mouths of some of the other folks that are just trying to go about their job. They're trying to do their job. They're trying to make, it seems like innovators are trying to make my job harder. I'm just trying to get contracts out. There doesn't have to be anything special or kooky about it. Just give me the opportunity to get my job done, folks, while other folks are over here and innovating. Have you seen that?
All the time, which is a remarkable and ironic error for the innovators to be making. Also an inevitable move for them to take. On the one hand, innovation is a team sport. Innovation requires collaboration, and the most effective groups are the ones that play well with others. At the same time, innovation is criticism. Like by definition, when we innovate, we are proposing a new approach which has an implied or an explicit criticism of the status quo. New approach means the old approach is somehow falling short in some way. So yeah, I made that point in my book, Punk, that innovation is criticism. So how do we offer criticism in a way that is productive, that is respectful, but is also clear and firm? And that's, again, one of the themes I read about in the book Punk, is that being willing to stand up and say, not just that your baby is ugly, but hey, there's a better way to do this. And there's a better way to do that than just calling the baby ugly, right? The innovative approach to innovation is collaborative, invitational, reducing barriers to entry, letting people come in and be themselves, but in a way that is supportive of other people also being themselves. So if you don't want to do innovation, that's okay. If you have a status quo solution that solves the problem and delivers meaningful value and works, great. Keep doing that. But in the instances where the status quo, the standard operating procedures aren't quite getting us where we need to go, then let's create an environment where we have openness to trying new stuff.
And how often do you feel like people are receptive to trying new stuff? I feel like within the government, it's a mixed bag. You've got folks that are very much of the mindset, what got us here today won't get us where we need to go tomorrow, which is like one of the sayings that resonates with me very much. So I'm in that camp where it's like, we need to look at what we need to do differently to be able to get to where we want to go tomorrow, not just stay in the same habits and same old ways of doing things. But not everybody agrees with that. Not everybody believes that same way.
Yeah. So I will answer that question in just a moment. I do want to rewind the tape briefly. We've used the word innovation quite a bit, but what do we mean by that word?
Yes.
And I think innovation is one of those words that gets used more often than it gets defined. And there's a lot of silliness around it because people say innovation, oh, that means a widget. Some new widget that counts. No, innovation is not just about a new widget. When I talk about innovation, the definition I like to use, and again, I did use this in the opening chapter in my book, I like to define it as novelty with impact. So innovation is novelty with impact, or the other version we use, we call it something different that makes a difference. So if it's just novel, if it's just unusual, hey, I haven't seen one of those before, that's not innovation. It's only innovation if it is both new and it solves a problem, creates some value, has an impact, makes a difference in whatever dimension we're trying to measure. So all that to say, I personally have a large appetite for novelty. I love new stuff, right?
Yes.
Not everybody does, and that's okay. And in fact, it's good that not everybody has as much of an appetite for novelty as I have, because there's a risk with my appetite for novelty.
Sure.
The risk looks something like this, where I try something, hey, that was new, that was different, that worked great, let's never do it again. No, if it's new and it worked great, maybe we do it more than once. Maybe we make that the new SOP. We formalize it, we document it, we turn it into the way we do business. So when we recognize that different people have different appetites for novelty, what do we do with that?
Right.
Professor Jerry Harvey wrote a terrific book called The Abilene Paradox. And then his second book was called How Come Every Time I Get Stabbed in the Back, My Fingerprints Are on the Knife, which is probably the longest book title I've ever come across. But he makes the point that people don't fear change. People actually don't even fear novelty. What they fear is being left behind. And so when we come in with these novel ideas, these innovation proposals, the resistance is not so much of, hey, I don't understand it, or I don't like it, or it's too novel. The resistance oftentimes is rooted in the fact that people feel like, well, I'm not included in that. I'm going to be left behind somewhere. I'm going to be left out. The most successful innovation proposals that I've seen, that I've led, that I've been part of, have been the ones where we come in and say, you have a role in this. You have a place in this. You got a seat at the table. Whether you might still be doing the same stuff that you were doing before. Like you don't have to be fully on board and doing all the specific things we're talking about here, but you're also not being left behind. You're not being left out. I think that's the key skill for innovators if they want to make sure their innovation has the impact that they want to have. Pitch it in a way that is inclusive and invitational, not exclusive, and not just throwing criticisms at the wall.
And how do you make people feel included, first of all? How do you demonstrate the impact that you believe that your innovation can have? I feel like oftentimes folks see things that are new and they're like, okay, that's a great whiz bang you got there, but how am I supposed to integrate that into my daily life? How am I supposed to integrate that into my organization or my operations?
Yes. Oh, Chelsea, that is exactly the right question. I love that question. And I wish more people would ask that question, right? When I make this pitch, how do I make sure it lands and it works for the people that I'm pitching to and looking to include? The short version of it, in a single word and in 2 words, ask questions. So a single
Okay.
word would be questions, right?
Yeah.
Asking questions like, would this be helpful? As opposed to, let me tell you what y'all should do. So
Yeah.
I like to phrase it as, let's try this as a simple 3-word phrase. It is the closest thing I've ever come to a magic formula for making change happen. Because let's try this is the opposite of you do that. This inclusive, it's invitational. There's an us buried in that word let's, and it's experimental. So the word try, I'm not making any promises. I'm not guaranteeing a particular outcome. I'm inviting people to be part of a conversation, be part of an experiment. And then the word this is probably the hardest of the 3 words to say because this refers to something very specific. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So when I say, let's try this, what I mean is you and me, I'm part of the let's, I'm part of the team here. And so you're invited to come try something. We're going to play around a little bit. We're going to put something on the table. We're going to see what happens. But then this is where we actually have to be precise and specific about what is it actually you are proposing. And that's a step that people skip a lot of times. And buried in the let's try this is the question, would this be helpful? That's the question we're trying to answer. Would this be helpful? And that's a level of humility that I think the best innovators hold and the least effective innovators, frankly, the most frustrated innovators don't have. My message to any listeners who are, I want to be an innovator, but I'm frustrated. Why don't people just recognize my genius? How come they don't get on board with me and just do what I told them to do? How's your humility level? Let's do a little bit of self-reflection and say, are we approaching this in a humble way? Let's try this rather than you do that. And then the alternative is hold my beer. Also a bad idea.
I
Hold
know
my
a lot
beer
of
is not
those
the same as
folks.
let's try this, right? We're not just jumping off of cliffs and flapping our wings and hoping we can fly, right? The other thing that I think is, I'm an engineer myself. I've got 3 engineering degrees. But one thing that's often missing in our education for engineers, for innovators, for other types is communication skills. When my partner and I do innovation workshops, we often like to begin by saying, let's make a big list of all the barriers to innovation. And we fill up a whiteboard very quickly of what are the things that get in the way of innovation. And it's all the obvious things. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough support, leadership, fear, culture. And there's this great big list. Someday, somebody, I'm hoping, will finally raise their hand and say, my own personal inability to communicate gets in the way of my effectiveness as an innovator. That hasn't happened yet. And yet, our ability to tell a story, our ability to speak the language of the people we're speaking to, that's probably the biggest barrier to being an effective innovator. And in large part, it's because we're not trained in this area. We don't get a lot of engineers don't get a lot of storytelling training, but it's not a hard skill to learn once we decide to learn it. And again, I'm picking on engineers a little bit just because that's my field, but engineers do hard things all the time. Engineers learn hard skills all the time. Engineers could learn how to tell a good story if they chose to put in the time and the effort and study it as a practice, as a skill. So I think that's a great place to start as well, because that does tend to get in people's way in terms of their ability to make good shit happen.
Yeah, I think that's right on point. And I see that all too often is folks believe that they are communicating effectively and they are telling their story, but they're
Yes.
telling it for themselves, to themselves, and they are not like thinking about the fact that other people need to also resonate with your story. That needs to resonate with them. They need to be able to see what you're doing, why it's valuable, where you're going, and how they can participate, how they can get involved. And all too often, we see folks that just come into the conversation and say, I wrote this really great, really technical proposal, and it was just the best thing since sliced bread. And no one else thought, I don't know what's wrong with these people. and it turns the notch, or it turns the dial to the folks that are, I am just in my own sort of echo chamber here. And why won't you come and join me in my echo chamber?
Right. Why doesn't the world recognize my genius?
Yes.
Maybe it's because the way you're presenting it makes it hard for them to recognize your genius. So, yeah, I think storytelling, asking questions, and approaching the work with humility, boy, that's a pretty magical combination right there.
Now, do you feel like that generally applies across the verbal and the conversation side as well as the written side? Because I would see a proposal coming in that says, let's try this. And I don't know, now that I think about it, I probably would be like, okay, let's see what they're trying to ask about and see if that kind of fits with our mission set. But I think a lot of the government evaluators, at least, would probably be like, no, we've tried that already and it didn't work every single time. So just please go away and stop asking.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about precedents a little bit.
Yeah.
When we come in with an idea and we say, hey, let's go try this, sometimes the response is, we tried that already and it didn't work.
Right.
Sometimes that exact same person who is saying, we tried that already and it didn't work, also says, almost in the same breath, we've never tried that before, and how could we possibly try a new thing? Which is it? How do
Yeah.
you hold both of those ideas? And my response to the failed precedent is to anticipate it. I want to be the one who brings it up. Here's the thing I would like us to try. I know we've tried it before and it didn't work. And here's what we learned from that failure. And here's what we're going to propose doing differently based on what we learned from that previous failure. Or, hey, we've done that already before and it did work. Great. I know we've tried this before and it did work. And here's what we're going to learn from that success. But actually, my third book, titled Lift, takes a look at aviation pioneers in the late 1800s. These are the people who, in the decades immediately prior to the Wrights, who had their first successful flight in 1903, these are the people who designed, built, launched, and crashed flying machines in the failed attempt to fly. And it's a fascinating set of stories to tell and experiments to study, because these are the people who didn't make it. They were not the first person to build a flying machine. What if we learned from their failures? What if we approached failure as something to study rather than something to deny or to use it as an excuse? We tried that once and it didn't work, let's never try it again. Or we tried that 10 times and it didn't work, let's never try it again. And when we study failure, we often discover that failures are not all created equal. Failure is not always the end of the story, they're not the whole story, but failures come in a couple different modes. Actually, in my very first book, I talked about optimal failures versus epic failures.
Ooh,
So
I
an
like that.
optimal failure costs you a little and teaches you a lot. An epic failure costs you a lot and teaches you a little. So if we spend decades and billions to develop some big piece of new wonder tech and it doesn't work, that's an expensive failure. That's an epic failure. We spent a lot of time and money on it. And 20 years later, we finally discover, oh, that was a bad idea. Hard to apply those lessons because I don't have much career left because I've spent my 20 years doing that. An optimal failure, on the other hand, is a small team with a short schedule and a tight budget. So our exposure to loss is constrained. We're not losing as much. And because we get to the end of the story quickly, we're able to learn faster and then apply those lessons to the next, let's try this, to the next experiment. And so when we look at like aviation in the late 1800s, a lot of people tried building aircraft with flapping wings, which made a ton of sense. It made so much sense, right? Birds, bats, and bugs all flap their wings to fly. How dare we try to fly in a way other than the way God intended people to fly was by flapping your wings. Chelsea, have you ever been on an airplane that had flapping wings?
No, I've seen a folding wingtip. I will put that there, but otherwise, no, I've never seen a flapping airplane.
They're called ornithopters. They do exist. They're terrible. You don't want to fly in an ornithopter. But there was a sort of dead end path. Yes, birds, bats, and bugs all flap their wings, but really, if people are going to fly, we need static wings. We just need wings that don't go up and down. Until we study the failures, until we say, these 10 guys who all built flapping wing aircraft, none of them worked. I think we can stop doing the flapping wing thing because the other group who also failed, who had static wings, they were making more progress. That's a more promising path. And so I'm real big on studying failure, on asking good questions about failure. Is this genuinely a dead end? Or is it a promising path that's making some progress in the direction that we're trying to go? It can be hard to distinguish between the two, but it's impossible to distinguish between the two if we don't look, or if we don't put in the effort to do the analysis. the analysis is still tricky, right? It still takes effort. It's impossible if we don't actually do it. So I like to say, start there. So look at the precedents. Hey, did we try this before? Did it work out? What did we actually learn from it? Or did we just dismiss it? Because that
Yeah.
dismissal undermines our learning and tends to be arrogant and not rooted in questions.
I love the flavors of failure there for what it's worth. I think that's a
Yeah.
phenomenal way to think about it because that's absolutely correct. There are definitely epic failures and definitely optimal failures. But how do you get to a point where you're in an organization and say you've done the epic failure? And I think that's unfortunately more common, especially in the government sphere, than many would like to think. I can't count the number of systems that I've interacted with or that I've been a part of the process for that are ultimately still trying to get past their struggles and get to market and really are realizing that it's not working, but they
Yeah.
ultimately have it. From what I've seen, a lot of what I think of is like corporate cognitive bias. They've got a sunk cost fallacy, or they've
Mm,
got some anchoring that they put themselves into the position of not being able to really break themselves free from. And I have to think that that gets in the way of even recognizing it as a failure, let alone even trying to analyze what you've done that could have been better or that was a failure.
yes, yes. Wow. You hit a lot of really important themes there. Let me try and unpack a couple of them.
Yeah.
First, so the main theme of my first book, titled Fire, was that innovation doesn't have to cost so much, take so long, or be so complicated. That we get better results with a short schedule, a tight budget, and a small team, and a simple approach to the technology. But here's the problem. In our organizations, in our bureaucracies, and things like the Pentagon, we tend to equate budgets with prestige. So if you are
Yes.
managing a larger budget, then you are more important than somebody managing
Yes.
a smaller budget. And the way you
100%.
demonstrate professional growth is, oh, you managed a $1 million program last year, you better manage a $10 million program next year, because that's how we demonstrate professional growth. We tend to equate long timelines with strategic genius. This is
Mm-hmm.
a 20-year program, or the number of programs where they had the word future in the name. Oh, if your program has the word future in the name, my prediction is it will fail.
Oh
Like you
no.
are just setting yourself up to failure if you put the word future in the name. So it's a future combat system. The intelligence community had the future imagery architecture. There's a number of them that have that because we're not planning to deliver this future capability anytime soon. We're going to deliver it in the future.
Mm,
And that
yeah.
reduces the time pressure to deliver quickly. If your program has the word interim in the name, my money's on that one. Hey, I just need a
Hmm.
quick interim solution that's just going to keep things moving along. It's going to be good enough. Those tend to deliver ahead of schedule, under budget, and do more than they were designed to do. Similarly, we tend to treat complexity as a sign of sophistication. Man, the number of program managers and engineers I've seen who stand up in front of a group of people and say, this is the most complicated thing we've ever built, as if that's a bragging point, as if that's something to be proud of. No,
Yeah.
complexity is
Yeah.
fragile. Complexity introduces costs and delays and more failure modes. Yeah, so these values that we approach the work with, if we overvalue complexity, if we overvalue large budgets, if we overvalue long timelines, that's going to head us down a particular path. I'll give you an example. The the Viking mission to Mars. Viking was humanity's first attempt to put a rover on a lander on another planet. They landed in like 1976, huge success. They collected a bunch of images, and hey, Viking was a huge win. And have you heard about Viking 2? No, you have not, because there's no Viking 2. Viking was so successful that NASA said, that was great, that was amazing, let's never do it again. It was 20 years before we tried to go back to Mars, because Viking was so expensive and so complicated and so hard that they couldn't justify that level of investment a second time.
Sure.
So while we can say Viking was a success, that actually created an unsurmountable barrier to any further attempts, which kind of feels like a failure of the overall mission. Because what NASA's mission is to explore the universe, right?
Yeah.
And although Viking taught us things about Mars, it prevented us from continuing that mission of exploration. And so it was a tactical success, but a strategic failure, I would contend. And their approach was, hey, let's minimize risk by maximizing redundancy. There will be no single point of failure in this piece of hardware. And that means we're going to have double and triple redundancies. And what does that do? That adds cost, that adds weight, that adds complexity, that all of these horrible challenges. So 20 years go by, they finally have recovered enough, they've forgotten enough about how hard that was the first time to go back to Mars, and they send the Pathfinder rover. This is humanity's first attempt to put a rover on another planet, and it is small, it is simple, it is 1/15th the cost of Viking in constant year dollars. It was developed in a third of the time with a team like a sixth of the size. I might be making up that last number, but most of those numbers are correct. So a much smaller team, much smaller budget, much simpler technology, and Pathfinder collected 10 times more data than originally designed. They hoped it would last a week, or they designed it to last a week. They hoped it would last a month. It drove around for 90 days, so like an order of magnitude longer. Pathfinder was followed by Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, Perseverance. So 25 years of ongoing rover missions. Each one was a little bit bigger. Each one cost a little bit more. Each one did a little bit more. But for the total cost of all 4 or 5 of these rovers, was about what we spent on Viking. So for the same amount of money, for the same investment, we can get one shot, put all our eggs in that one Viking basket, and sure, it was a success, but we can't do anything else for the next 20 years. Or we could have this portfolio approach of an iterative, incremental series of smaller, more focused rovers, and we get 25 plus years of active exploration of the red planet. Yeah, that's the better path, both technically and organizationally. Like the tech advances better because we keep trying more things at it. But my favorite thing about the series of rovers on Mars is what it did for the talent at NASA. This allowed engineers and technologists and scientists to keep doing the work. Whereas Viking, once you did it, we're not going back again. 20 years, we're not building another piece of hardware that's going to Mars. Those scientists and engineers did not get to apply anything that they learned from Viking. They didn't develop as professionals because they weren't actually doing the work. So if we want to be innovative in our organizations, we got to take care of our people. We got to give them the skills, the training, the experience of doing the work. And that's where that portfolio approach really, I think, is again, as close to a magic formula as I've ever found.
Interesting. Now, I know that we have talked about, and it's been circulating for years, that program executive offices result in the things like the original rover there that wasn't effective. It did what it needed to in the short term, but in the long run, it really hindered the mission.
NASA paid a price.
Yes. Yep. And now we've seen a shift in the mentality and the mindset of working towards portfolio acquisition executives, I think. So is that kind of along the lines of heading in the right direction for getting some organizational innovation started and igniting a bit of a fire under various asses?
In a word, yes. With an asterisk.
Okay.
So yes, I've been writing about and encouraging portfolio-based approaches for a long time, and not just me. Harry Markowitz won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1990 for his work on what he called modern portfolio theory. He basically did the math behind don't put all your eggs in one basket. He showed that a diverse portfolio of smaller investments is the optimal way to maximize your return for a given level of risk. So he was doing work in the area of like investments and stocks and bonds and things like that. But it turns out this portfolio theory applies to portfolios of technology programs and a lot of other areas. So if we're doing that, if we are making a diverse portfolio of smaller investments, a diverse collection of smaller investments, if that's what we mean by portfolio management and portfolio approach, then I'm all for it. And then to get real specific and tactical, I think the best portfolios are the ones where we manage our risks, our requirements, and our resources at the portfolio level rather than risks, requirements, and resources at the program level. This is a harder shift to make, because this says, all right, in my portfolio, I have 10 programs. Within these 10 programs, I've got a certain amount of money and resources. I've got some requirements that this portfolio are going to address, and I've got some risks that this portfolio is looking to address. And the output should be assessed as a portfolio, not at an individual program level. So if program A fails, you shouldn't care whether program A fails or not, as long as the portfolio is delivering. So it's kind of like the venture capital concept. I invest in 100 companies, 80 of them fail, a couple of them do okay, and 1 or 2 just go through the roof. And as a portfolio, I make enough money to keep doing the work.
Right.
I'm afraid oftentimes in the government, we tend to say, sure, your portfolio had a good return, but I want to talk about those 80 investments that failed. That's project management, not portfolio management. And again, this is a harder shift because we do have to accept some programs had some losses. Some programs didn't deliver. Some programs got canceled or whatever. But as long as the portfolio is addressing the risks, managing your resources appropriately, and satisfying the requirements we're trying to satisfy, that's good. I don't
Yeah.
want to say that just should be enough. That's great. So I'm cautiously optimistic that people understand portfolio management enough to recognize that we should be addressing our outputs at the portfolio level and not caring too much of program A or program B crashes and burns, or which of these 10 programs in my portfolio is addressing risk number one or requirement number two. So if we can make that shift, then I think that would be a really helpful progress.
I absolutely agree. I think that would be a mentality change, which I'm always an eternal optimist here. So I want to say that we will do this and it will work out. Again, I don't want to be caught dead anchoring myself to past failures that ultimately have all the opportunity to succeed if done correctly these days. But
Right.
from the past experience that we've seen and had, like the government's not really great at making a massive, distinct shift in mentality. And I think probably because there's so many different personalities involved. There's so many different people. There's so many different individual sort of contributors to the conversation that it's whoever speaks the loudest tends to get to where they want to go, which makes it harder for everybody to come along and go in the right direction, especially if you've got somebody over here who's, hey, come over this way. We are not going to make it that way. You guys come follow me. And then it turns out that they're not quite necessarily right. So I want to get back to this concept of corporate cognitive bias and how you get over that and how you make it past that to be able to turn a new page, turn the leaf to get
Yeah.
somewhere.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a great question and a hard one. I think I'm a big believer that the ROI on dealing with reality is pretty high.
Sure.
So reality
Okay.
has a large ROI.
Yes.
So what do we mean by that? The return on investment for the time that we spend engaging with reality, not guesses, not biases, not preferences, but actual data. And this is my engineering roots showing through again. So how do we make sure that we are fully engaging with reality? I mentioned storytelling earlier, but we want to add a little asterisk with the storytelling because sometimes the best story or the story that sounds the best isn't fully rooted in reality. Sometimes the best
Right.
sounding stories can have some wishful thinking baked into them. I'm also a wild-eyed optimist. I'm here for some wishful thinking. Yes, let's bring some
Yes.
wishful thinking. We need some hope. We need some creativity. We need some optimism in the work. But when we talk about storytelling as an important skill, a critical skill for this space, it needs to be paired with, I don't know if is media literacy the right term I'm looking for, but the ability to, when you hear a story, to ask the good questions about that story, to understand, is it real or is it Memorex? Is there data behind this story? Is this a credible story or is this just wishful thinking? So it's the opposite of just being credible. We don't want to be naive as we listen to these stories. So on the one hand, yes, I want engineers to tell better stories. And the people who are listening to the stories, I want them to ask better questions about these stories. So it's really a dialogue and nobody's getting snowed. I think that's probably the best recommendation I have is that, again, recognizing reality has a big ROI. Let's make sure we're dealing with reality both in how we craft our stories, how we hear, ingest these stories, how we respond to them, and the questions that we ask. One of the taglines with my new company, the SparkLit Group, is ask bolder questions, build better futures. And some of those bolder questions might be like, tell me a story
Mm.
and show me the data.
I am a sucker for some good data and some good data analysis with that. I love to
Yes.
see something put into great charts, good pictures, but ultimately you've
Right.
got to have the actual data to drive your decisions before making any sort of move.
The
No,
data never speaks for itself. The
no,
data always has to be analyzed, interpreted, put into some sort of context. I think this gets back to one of the earlier questions of, hey, I showed people the data. Don't they just recognize I'm a genius and go do what I want?
mm,
Well, how much did you analyze that data? Did you
right.
interpret it? Did you extrapolate from it? What does the data actually even mean? That's a question I think we all need to spend some time on.
Absolutely. This has been just a fantastic conversation, and everybody's going to get value out of this. Like, I have no doubt, but I'm pretty sure folks are going to be knocking down the door. So if they want to talk to you, how do they get a hold of you?
Oh, yeah. You can go to our website, sparklitgroup.com. That's Spark and then LIT. So SparkLit Group is the idea of the spark that ignites the bigger flame. Or you can drop me an email at dan@sparklitgroup.com.
Perfect. And you're on LinkedIn too, which I love. You've put out some fantastic LinkedIn content that I've been following with eager intention.
Thank you. Yes, find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty prolific there. So yeah, would love to have people come check that out.
Awesome. We will get all of your contact information in the show notes and everybody will be able to reach out. I encourage you to reach out if you're having some hard times with innovation or if you're trying to make something stick that's not sticking in the brains or in the hands of the folks that you're trying to get it into. Absolutely. Reach out to Dan. This has been a fantastic conversation and I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Awesome, Chelsea. What a blast. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks. And thanks everyone for listening this week to GovCon Unscripted. Don't forget to share and subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends if you've got an opportunity. And feel free to leave a review. We love the feedback. So thanks again, Dan. This has been fantastic.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of GovCon Unscripted with your host, Chelsea Roberts. Do you have a GovCon story or need guidance in government contracting? Connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn to be a guest on the show or to enhance your business strategy. Don't forget, your network is your net worth. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your growing GovCon community.